Can I just say, thank you so much for the invitation. Just these last 2 days have been absolutely amazing. And can I say, was anybody at IFSO in Madrid by any chance? If you were, can you put your hand up? Fantastic. I have to say, I was privileged to be one of the speakers on the integrated health program with IFSO. And I think in Madrid, we really, really raised the bar in terms of integrated health, allied health. And I just say, sort of to come almost 8 weeks later, come to London, you know, my home country, and see this, the quality and standard and just so many AHPs in this room. I think it's fantastic. So thank you so much for your support with that. So I'm Dr. Yitka Graham. I'm the BOMS National Research Lead. I'm an Associate Professor of Health Services Research at the University of Sunderland, and I'm a visiting professor at the University of Anahuac in Mexico City. What I'd like to speak to you about is actually, and I think, well, Manisha is always really, really hard to follow on from, but I have to say, I think there is a real connection between what I'm going to talk about and what Manisha's just talked about. She's got this very, very rare talent about taking chemistry and all things biomedical and putting the human perspective on it. So it isn't just about biomedical markers, what that actually means to the patient. So thank you very much. You've actually, Manisha, set a beautiful scene for me. But I want to just talk something different. It's about the social aspects of bariatric surgery. I would have to say, I actually spent 3.5 years of my life doing a doctorate to try and understand this a little bit more. Just some disclosures. I have received funding from Roche Diagnostics, Metagenics, and Smith & Nephew for my research. The aims of the presentation I'd like to do is really just give you a greater understanding of the social aspects of bariatric surgery. So there's more to it than just weight loss, comorbidity improvement. There's a whole side of things which I think anecdotally we sort of know about, but sort of underpinning that with sort of robust research I think is really, really important. I want to highlight the main social aspects that patients undergo following surgery and highlight how patients might deal with these aspects, and then to present a conceptual theory of what I found to be risk adjustment to the social aspects of bariatric surgery. So currently what we know, and as Manisha said, we know bariatric surgery profoundly affects the social aspects of a patient life. The social aspects of life after surgery are not widely researched, nor are they widely understood. When I first started this research, it was like, well, yeah, we know this, we know that. It was very, very anecdotal. There was sort of some stories, but there was a lot of information, but there wasn't a lot of knowledge, if that makes sense. The adjustments are often influenced by previous weight-related stigma prior to surgery. And actually, there you are. What you said yesterday about the complex group of patients, about really trying to understand them, being empathetic in the clinical consultation. Thank you so much for saying that yesterday, because that's what this is all about. What you said yesterday that's my world. So I just love that somebody else is on that wavelength too, but just thank you so much for saying it, because we do need understanding and we do need compassion with these patients. And again, this is what it's about. So I think you've really got, these are people who've really been, that obesity stigma, that cuts, that hurts, and they come in to our world in bariatric surgery with a lot of emotional baggage. And with the life adjustments after surgery, very, very few people actually regret the decision to undergo bariatric surgery, but life isn't perfect afterwards. The weight loss doesn't make everything better. It improves a lot of things, but there still is a lot that these people have to deal with. So really just to understand that the previous weight-related stigma and the high rates of partial or non-disclosure around the scrutiny of a changed body appearance and eating habits. Bariatric weight loss, very, very rapid weight loss and change appearance attracts a lot of attention. And for our patients, that's sometimes not very welcomed. And a lot of times they really don't know how to deal with some of these questions that really seem to come out of left field. So I think really what they do is they go from the stigma of obesity to the judgment of bariatric surgery. So many patients have experienced weight-related stigma prior to surgery, and feelings of failure remained. And there is this perception of bariatric surgery being cheating, being quite an easy way out. And a lot of it is, it's actually the surgery has done the work instead of the patients. Have any of your patients ever said that people have said that to them? Now, patients, and we know that's very, very different, but it's the perception, what other people feel. And often these people haven't had surgery, they don't know anybody, so they're just making a lot of value judgments without any knowledge underneath. So societally, the mechanisms of bariatric surgery are not widely understood. I think somebody said yesterday, gastric band is the ubiquitous term. But it was Tony that said that. You see anything in the paper, it's gastric band. Gastric band did this. When it could have been a bypass, it could have been a sleeve, but gastric band is the term that they use synonymously with bariatric surgery. And again, it's the perceptions of cheating and taking the easy way out. So the impact of the judgment, I mean, it's sort of human nature and it's quite common sense. It's really, really understandable. But they're afraid or they're reluctant to disclose the reasons for that changed body appearance. And also eating habits, they eat differently. And there's parts of eating that are very, very different to other people after surgery. And then because of those two things, engaging in social activities can be quite difficult and quite stressful. For example, what my research found, and it was just something that absolutely blew me away. I went in very inductively, not expecting, I didn't want to know what I was going to find. I wanted the patients to tell me what it was, but how troublesome eating out in restaurants is. And actually, that really made me sad, because actually, if we go out as a group of people to a restaurant, we'll enjoy ourselves. It's the social interactions, it's that sort of basic eating and talking and being together. It's so nurturing. Think we are a group, we work in a very specific discipline. We don't get together very often. And when we do, the social aspects, it's so important. But to not be able to enjoy that, I just think that's incredibly sad. So if we look at typical social situations, there's personal relationships, there's family relationships, there's relationships with colleagues at work, and the external wider relationships. So these are sort of permanent and transit encounters. It could be sort of people that you see in a shop every day. It could be sort of neighbors that you don't know very well, but these people are always in your life in some shape or form. And then also we know that relationships evolve and they build through social situations. So the more you see people, the more you speak to them, the more you get to know them. That person sort of becomes a permanent fixture in your life. But it's these social encounters that sort of drive that. So there's a theory called social penetration theory, and it was invented, but it was conceptualized in 1973 by Altman and Taylor in California. And they posit that relationships begin and they deepen through self-disclosure. So typically, there's the people that you meet, so the work, the family, the community, so there's a breadth of the types of people that you would encounter in social situations. And then it's the depth and it's the detail of these areas and the interactions with these people. And they say there's 5 layers of social intimacy, and a person sort of goes through these layers. And actually, and they've got a wonderful thing where, if you understand this in the concept of bariatric patients, they said it's like an onion. So if you can sort of imagine this big onion, and we go through the layers. So that first layer, so that really rough, hard, sort of not hard, but that sort of bristly sort of skin of that layer, that's the orientation layer. So that's a very superficial. That's like, hiya, thank you very much. Just hi, just keep walking. And then second of all, we go into, they call it the exploratory affective layer. And that's casual. And actually for a lot of very sort of, most relationships tend to be at this level. The majority of the relationships you will have in your lives would be at the exploratory affective layer. And if we dig a little deeper, we go into something called the affective layer. And that's where you're sort of comfortable to reveal sort of more personal information, the sort of things that you would think twice about disclosing. You would become quite comfortable disclosing to that group of people that you had achieved that layer with. And then a stable layer, so you're very, very comfortable disclosing deeply personal information. And the final layer is the depenetration layer, so where the actual cost of self-disclosure outweighs the benefits of disclosing. So, and then you would withdraw. So you sort of progress this. But actually, you can sort of dip in and out of these layers, but you would sort of progress them. There's sort of a natural progression to them as you become more comfortable speaking to people. So if we look at this with our bariatric patients, that fear of judgment and that reluctance to disclose, and feeling comfortable in that orientation. So actually, with bariatric patients can be quite comfortable in that outer layer because they don't have to say anything. So, hiya, that's fine. You look good, thanks very much, cheers, see you later. So there's no need to sort of hang around and discuss anything personal, just a very, very superficial encounter.
But the scrutiny of changed appearance and eating habits means people feel pressured into entering the deeper layers. So do you have a conversation like, hi, how are you? Well, you've lost a lot of weight. How have you done that? So automatically, that's pushing you into a deeper layer. But that's not a natural conversation. There's been a very superficial greeting. And then it just goes sort of straight in. And actually, patients said to me, when actually discussing, I said, what do you think? And he said, well, it's actually like a knife going into the onion and just stabbing it. And he said, and it's quite startling because often that's something, well, you've lost all weight, how have you done it? Sorry, I'm picking on you. But if you're not prepared for that, it's quite a shock. And actually sort of, do you feel, a lot of patients say, well, I feel like I have to tell them. Well, who says you have to? No, but we just feel we have to explain ourselves. And often it's sort of feeling guilty because they've had surgery or, and some of these cuts very, it's complex. Everybody has individual reasons for doing it, but it's not comfortable and and because if you say, well, actually, Adam says, well, actually, I have had bariatric surgery. What Adam doesn't know is what the person's asking, how he's lost the weight. You don't know how they feel about that. So they might say, oh, that's fantastic, Adam, well done. They go, oh, that's great. Those people aren't getting cancer because of you. You don't know. So you take a chance with that if you say that. So what we found is a lot of people, actually, I went to study for it. Oh, you dieted. Fantastic. That's good for you. That's safe. But actually, what you've done, you've actually lied. And if you've lied, how do we sort of change society's judgments about bariatric surgery? And so one of the bonuses I actually did about the surgery, as I was interviewing sort of people for this research, I got a list of lies that people told me to avoid telling others they've had bariatric surgery. And by the time I finished interviewing 18 people, anytime anybody said, oh, I really hate this, well, can I just photocopy this for you? There you go, take it, if anything might be useful. And actually people email me and go, thank you so much, you really got me out of some difficult situations. And I wasn't expecting that as well. But if we frame that sort of concept of social risk, so not about the risk of undergoing surgery, this isn't about anesthetic risk, this is about social risks. Social encounters are underpinned by risk. The meaning and the interpretation of that risk influence the actions that people will take. And I think really we as healthcare professionals need to understand the perception of social risk because we need to be supporting patients before surgery. So a lot of time we talk to them about what's going to happen, but actually until they've actually undergone surgery and are looking like afterwards, some of that stuff doesn't make a lot of sense and it doesn't put it into context. So until you're in that situation, you don't know what you're going to do. But by saying to them before surgery, some people actually feel a bit funny about bariatric surgery. You ought to think about who might you tell, or who wouldn't you tell? How would you deal if somebody says something about surgery? Just get them thinking about things, but not framing it in a negative way, just helping them to prepare themselves for surgery. And again, reminding of those things post-operatively. And it is about, I think, by doing this, we sort of give a more holistic view of that patient experience. And I do think this has potential to improve the quality of life of patients by taking the social factors into account. So this is just a brief summary of how I actually undertook the research. So it was carried out between 2013 to 2016. It was a collaboration between the University of Sunderland and City Hospital Sunderland, which is one of the highest volume centres in the country. And the great thing about it was I ended up with a job there afterwards, so it was great. We used qualitative methodology, and I think one of the things that was really interesting is when I came in, I think the surgeon all thought I was going to do something very, very quantitative, lots of numbers. And I said, well, I'm doing qualitative research. And they went, well, what's that? And I said, well, actually quite small sample sizes, but what you get is a lot of really, really rich data to help you to understand this. So as I was presenting the findings, I'd say, what do you think? Your surgeons, the dietitians, the nurses, they went, oh yeah, absolutely, we get this. And there wasn't a time, a surgeon would go, I'm not picking on it, but they go, well, what about the numbers? But if you think about generally the world in which surgeons exist, it makes a lot of sense that they'd be asking this. I said, but it's not about the numbers. I said, I want you to do the best operation, I want you to do the safest procedure, I want you to do the right procedure. But what this does is this helps you accept, helps the patients to adjust to that wonderful surgical work that you've done. We all have to be good at something. You wouldn't want me operating on you, that's fine. This is my comfort zone. So it was really sort of selling that concept, and qualitative methodology is not a substitute for quantitative research. They both should sit hand in hand, they both have different aims and different goals, but we should embrace both of them and look at things from both perspectives. So it is about understanding and providing a theoretical explanation of patients' experiences, small sample sizes, but getting really, really in-depth narratives. And actually, I went in, and an inductive approach means you have to sort of park everything that you've actually known before, and your own individual biases and assumptions, and almost put them into one side. And you have to sort of reflect on it afterwards, because all the times the biases do creep in. But it has to be a co-constructive knowledge between the patient and the participants. So it was the patient voice I really, had to embed. So we had 18 participants, we had 11 females and 7 males, because when you start recruiting into these types of studies, you always get women. They were great. Some men, give me some men. I looked at different socioeconomic statuses. I really tried to get a wide breadth of people. And then what we did, and again, because in our trust, I can only recruit people up to 2 years after surgery. After 2 years, they're back in the community. Of course, many of you did. So they were interviewed between 5 and 24 months post-surgery. 16 of them were primary procedures and 2 were revisional procedures. But actually, if you look back, that's probably about right. We in the UK were not doing many revisional procedures at the time. So the findings were, we found that patients take actions in social situations based on their perception of risk. And the research identified 3 categories of risk adjustments. We had risk acceptors, we have risk challengers, and we have risk contenders. And I'll go through each one. This has actually been published in Clinical Obesity. It's open access, so if you Google Yitka Graham Clinical Obesity, this paper is there, and it's really available to download. What we found, the risk acceptors, so these were sort of 2/3 of the participants. The risk acceptors were comfortable in those situations. They could identify and proactively think about and prepare for these social situations, which could be difficult. So there was a lot of thinking, but generally they were compliant with pre- and post-surgical advice, and they tended to have a lot of social support. And I think Tony was talking about support groups yesterday. The value of having sort of positive support really can't be underestimated. That really came out loud and clear. And there's different support systems for each participant. So some people found actually they got better support at work. Some people felt family members were better. But overall, actually, to be honest, if all bariatric patients were risk acceptors, our lives would be really, really easy. So in a way, it's good. I think we're 12 is good, but then there really weren't any problems with these patients. I thought, but this isn't reflective of a whole cohort of patients. And we found one, and actually, so this risk challenger, so it sort of conceptualized, he understood the need for changes after surgery. So he understood why he had why he chose to have it. He was terribly asthmatic, he had joint pain, he was waiting for knee replacement. He totally understood why he had to have bariatric surgery. But he didn't adhere to any of the post-surgical advice. He challenged the advice, and actually he turned up a motorbike. He had the skull and crossbones bandana, a big leather jacket, 19 in a garden centre, and he sort of was all day because it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he just sort of grabbed a chair, turned it down, sat down, right, crack on then, love. And he was holding a bottle of full sugar Coke. It wasn't Coke, zero diet. I sort of came in and I smelled of cigarettes, and I just went, how did you get through? And so again, not having to, but just sort of unpicking this and saying, but you are blatantly, you're turning up to be interviewed by somebody about bariatric surgery, and you're doing all the wrong things, and you're really quite open and quite happy about what's going on here. And he said, well, and I said, so, how did you, choose your, he said, well, I wanted a sleeve hysterectomy because it would let me have a normal life. And I said, well, what's the normal? He said, well, I want to eat and drink what I want. He said, you can't do that with a bypass. And he says, healthy people couldn't drink this Coke if I had a bypass, right? Well, but is that sort of not the reasons for your waking? But but it's one of these things, but he could argue quite logically about it. So, you don't want to get into an argument with him, but it was just like he didn't want surgery to take over his life and sort of change anything. So he sort of tweaked things, but still quite a naughty patient, if you like. But he justified the point, and he said, well, he lost about 30% of his body weight, but I still lost weight. So, I can do all these things, but I still lost weight. And I said, what about, have you told people? Oh, yeah, I tell people at surgery all the time. And you actually go around and you talk to people and you say, well, if you want to drink after surgery, this is what you do. You don't drink beer. He said, vodka is really good. Just mix it with Diet Coke. I'm just like, don't come to the support group. So I'm not going to thought he was quite funny, you couldn't help liking him. But you sort of think, this is all wrong, isn't it? But I think there was something about the fact that it was just how blatant he was about challenge, and he was quite happy to it, and I think it was just, I was desperate to find somebody else like it, and I couldn't, but I'm convinced that there's, does anybody see people like this? Yeah, excellent. So, and then the last one, this is the one I think was the most complex, so exactly what you said, it is one that was the most complex, and it's one that worried me more, and in terms of taking this work forward, these are the people that I think we need to flesh out and work with. So they were risk contenders, we got 5 of them. So that adjustment to life after surgery was really, really complex, and it was difficult. And they seemed to experience 2 types of setbacks. So the first one was within their control, so that would be like eating the wrong food, so that's something they had control of. And then there was other setbacks, so these were external factors, and these are things that, the best people in the world, they couldn't do anything about. And I did have, it was like sort of quite a sad story. It was a patient who had bariatric surgery because he had an industrial injury at work which caused paralysis in his left leg, so he couldn't walk very much, he couldn't go swimming to try and lose the weight because he'd slip and fall at the pool because he was a big guy. There weren't people around to help him, and so the surgery, he was sort of a risk for the anesthesia surgery. So, and he had some, had some intestinal problems, so they couldn't do a bypass. They could do a sleeve, and they said you can lose weight, but you're not going to lose as much weight as you would with a bypass. But the sleeve should help you. But what was awful is he actually lost a target amount of weight. He lost 40% of the weight. He only could get to 30, but he lost 40. He'd be fine for back surgery. He was too much risk for the surgery, and he just couldn't lose the rest of that weight. But actually, bariatric surgery did what it said on the tin, but unfortunately it can't cure everything, but it did what it was supposed to do. And he was trapped with that. He was like, I know I've eaten, I've done everything, and I know it's not it's my situation. So there was a real sort of feeling of out of control with that. But bariatric surgery, I was frustrated, but the sleeve can only do so much. So I think that was sort of a really good example of something that was out of control, and it was sort of that incomplete journey. They sort of didn't have that resolution. And there was pre-surgical issues that were not resolved after surgery, and I think this is something that, it was a diabetic, sort of long-term. She was a type 2 diabetic for 20 years. By the time she came to have surgery, they said she was insulin dependent. They said, we don't know whether you can come off the injections. You lose weight, but we really can't guarantee because you've had diabetes for so long, so we can't guarantee anything. And she said, but I don't want the injections because I feel ill when I have to take the injections. But I really want, she almost wasn't bothered about the weight loss. She wanted the diabetes to go away. But sure enough, she lost weight, but she couldn't stop the injections. And so to her, that was an incomplete journey. But they were sort of they could separate the surgery, but it was still that sort of expectation. And again, it was a real incomplete journey. And have you seen people like this where, but I think they're the ones, if I had to pick out of the 3, they're the ones I would choose to sort of take this forward with. But the group had high rates of non-disclosure. So there was one where she said, I was out for dinner with a friend, and she said, well, you've lost all this weight, you look completely different. But she said, if I find out you've had surgery, I'm never going to speak to you again. My first instinct is, I think you need some new friends. But she said, that was my first meal out after having the surgery, a group of people. She said, I couldn't before, I didn't feel comfortable going and eating out. And I said to myself, I'm going to go out, have a really good meal. And everyone's like, oh, you look fantastic, that's great. Nobody had said how they lost it. They said, oh, you look good. So she's like, right, in a safe place. And I said, yeah, you've had one of those silly operations, haven't you? She said, no, I haven't. I've been to Weight Watchers. She said, well, I'll find out. And it was almost a threat. And she said it just ruined the evening for me. So again, and it was sort of in the restaurant. It's not like in your own home, you can go upstairs, whatever. You kind of, she said it was like being trapped. But really, in summary, I think the societal judgments of bariatric surgery are often rooted in misconceptions of the mechanisms of surgery. So I think we really need to educate people about what bariatric surgery is and how it works. The social adjustments are complex and they're subjective. These 3 categories are based on 18 patients. I've done some further work. I haven't come up with everybody sort of seems to fit into these categories. And because I interviewed one, I don't know whether that changes over time or people move in between categories. That's something I want to be taken forward. I think what it is this risk adjustment theory. It gives you a framework in which to sort of help your patients to think about where they might fit into. Again, it's not perfect, but I think it's a good sort of baseline to start. But I think discussions around social adjustments are needed pre and post-operatively, and I think they need to be part of routine patient care. I think we need to be embedding these questions into pre and post consultations. And just say thank you very much, and happy to take any questions.
I got one question. Try to analyze that attitude to risk before surgery, whether there's change or whether there's some kind of pattern.
No, we didn't, because I think, and again, it was sort of one of the things when you do a doctorate, you're limited by time constraints. And so my thing was, you know, I had to get that data retrospectively, because how they would feel, I needed to interview them after surgery, because they haven't undergone the procedure, so pre-operatively, it would be very hard to say, well, I know exactly what you're saying, but I think it's the procedure that changes everything, and I wasn't sure what sort of information I would get, so I thought that if I start post-operatively and get the information there, because that's the catalyst for the change, and then sort of, I'd love to have a talk with you about that outside, because what can we do pre-operatively? But I think the thing is, because they haven't had the operation, so anything there is kind of hypothetical and anecdotal until they've actually had the procedure. They don't know what they're going to do, so I think it's perfect to think about it until it actually happens. But I know exactly what you mean.
Yes, in that third group, I see most of patients are going about the revision and none for life in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be quite
Yeah, I actually do. What I'd love to do is go back and do that with patients undergoing a revisional procedure, and see, and because actually they've already undergone one procedure, so getting the information pre-operatively about what category they're in, and then afterwards. But I think we only work with revisional procedure. I think because we're doing more revisional procedures, is that failure and is that judgment? We have to disclose two bariatric procedures. And I did actually. I was in Mexico doing and I did a debate, and we did a debate about who fails. Is it the procedure that fails, or is it the patient? And I argued for the side of the patient on sort of the basis loosely. But I simply don't know enough about it, and it is. But I think even if it seems to be the operation, the patient will still feel that they have contributed. I feel like we just have patients that just feel guilty about absolutely everything. It's just like say it's the complexity of how they think, and I just think we really, really need to try and understand that a bit more. But I agree with you about revisional patients.
I think socially is probably one of the most profound effects, because I don't think there's anybody in this room that hasn't seen half a dozen patients at the very least that the relationship hasn't broken down.
Yeah.
Particularly because, you know, the perception being that women will kind of grateful and tolerate any kind of rubbish from a relationship, but as you get slimmer, you get more attention, you start answering back, and the partner doesn't like it. So I mean, I've known loads of people that relationships broke down. And also relationships with really close friends, because everybody wants that fat friend, don't they, because they make them look better.
Absolutely.
And I think that as you start to lose weight, it's like they can't hide behind you anymore.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's one of the hardest things. Like their best friend from school isn't their best friend anymore.
Yeah.
And they can feel really bereft.
Absolutely. No, it hurts. Absolutely. No, I agree. Well, this is that was the diabetic woman who had said that, but she said this is somebody, and she'd known her since she was born. And to have that sort of judgment just at them, and it was, she was just an attack, and I felt trapped. But she said, you know, that isn't from a stranger. This is somebody I know, I'm very close with, and to make that, you know, does she not know me? Does she not know what I've been through? So absolutely, I agree.
I think they get complications as well, because like, well, I mean, you didn't really need the opt-in, it wasn't really necessary, so you got what you asked for, kind of thing. Yeah. You don't get any sympathy with the complications of bariatric and plastic.
But I think also there's redemption in diet, and there's redemption exercise, because it could be like you know, the diet, you know, you have chosen to have less, you have different types of food, you have chosen to eat less appointments, but all that is, you are at the gym, so we get forgiven, you know, for that. But the method, but bariatric surgery, you just don't forgive people, there's no redemption in it whatsoever. But I think we need to change these conversations, unless people are going to disclose they've had bariatric surgery and challenge these things, you know. They've been through the meat grinder, being stigmatized for being obese and aggressive, and they're just tired of it. And, and then to actually get them to go and talk a little bit more, it's not the thing. So some of these people, I said, why don't you have the conversation about, well, you're the researcher, that it's your research, you go and tell people, we're too tired to do it. But I think we need to, we need to keep plugging away, but I think we've only recognized obesity disease in 2013, and nobody recognized it. The American medical, it hasn't made a difference over here. It's going to take years because that stigma is so embedded in our culture that it's going to take years to address that. So, sorry, you had
I'm just thinking of Tony was saying, I've got a classic patient who's a risk acceptor, who's doing fantastically well, and her relationship broke down. She was made homeless, and now she's become a risk contender, and so her weight's going up. So how do we help those patients get back from that situation to get back into managing their psychological issues and things? It's very, very difficult. Getting back on track again, because that's the issue.
No, because I think thank you for that. That's a really interesting point, because again, that's an external, it's like a life event. Absolutely.
They want to get back to where they were, but they're really struggling.
Yeah. But the sources of support, which probably would have been the partner or that relationship, and but being, if you've been made homeless, your home is your sanctuary. That's been ripped away from you, and it's really interesting enough, and just. One of the people that I interviewed, and she was a risk acceptor, she came out from having bariatric surgery, and the partner was so against her having bariatric surgery. When she came out of the hospital, she went into a women's hostel, and the first 2 weeks after being discharged, she was in a women's hospital. And I just said, well, how did that work? She said, well, the women's hospital were amazing, but there was no way I was going home. She said, I wanted that surgery. And she said, but actually, the women's hostel was the best place for me. She said, I recovered from the surgery, but I gained a lot of personal strength from that. So I'm conscious we're probably going over it, but thank you very much.